All right, continuing on with this long slog through method binding, let's talk about how we can bind with arguments. So far, the examples we've seen, like the dispense wisdom method, didn't take any arguments. It was the same thing every time. It just picked some random thing from an array, a piece of wisdom, and then printed it out. But what if we want to pass in some data? What if we need arguments for that event handler? For example, let's say that this is our application. We have 4 buttons, and when I click on one of these buttons, I want it to take the current background color, like purple in this case, or whatever magenta, and make the container, the parent div, turn that color. If I click on the red one, they should all be surrounded by red. Green, everything should turn green. Now, not all the buttons are going to turn green, but the background around them. To do this, we need to make sure that we're passing in a color value when one of these is clicked. So if we head over here, I already have most of the component written out. Just to walk you through, I have colors and default props. It's an array with 4 colors. And then I am iterating over it using map. And for each color, I am making a new button where the style is an object that I constructed up here. It just has background color set to the individual color. So you could have done this, or I could have done this inline, but this is just slightly easier to understand. So right now there's no onClick. What I want to happen is for there to be a method called change color or something, and it takes a color in, and then we're going to update something so that it changes the background color of the parent div, the button list div. To do that, we have some data that's changing, so we need to use state. So I'm going to start there. I'm going to initialize my state, constructor props, super props. We're not actually going to use props in the constructor, but I'll still put it there. I know I'm a broken record about that. And then let's initialize state. And let's just set color, and the initial color will be, how about cyan? And that needs to be a string. What am I doing? Okay. So we have this initial color, and then let's make sure that we're connecting this .state.color to the background of this div. So we'll then do style equals, and I'll do this one inline in contrast with what I did here. We're going to make background color of that div this .state.color. So right now it should be cyan, and it is. Now what we want to happen is we click on one of these buttons, it calls change color with the color passed in, and then inside of here we're going to call this.setState, and we're going to set color to be the color that was passed in. So maybe I'll change this to be new color to make it clearer. All right, so whatever color is passed in, we want to set state of color to be that new color. So when we're doing our onClick over here, it's a little bit trickier to pass something in. So we're going to want to call this.changeColor. But if I try and pass something in right now, we're going to run into issues because that function will be immediately invoked. It's going to run. So if I try and pass in the color, which in our case is called C inside of this loop, it's not really going to do what we want. This is a problem. The error that we're getting has to do with the fact that setState is being called a couple of times in a row very quickly. So anyway, this is not how we want it to work. This is immediately executing the function. We don't want that to happen. So we have a couple choices, but we need to bind the value of this, and I'm going to use .bind, and it looks like this, saying the word this a lot. This dot change color dot bind this, and then we pass in C, the color, as the second argument. Make sure I add that E to spell it correctly. I've also added a console.log up here so we can see the color. And if we come over here, it should work, and it is working indeed. So you can see the colors are being printed out here. So what we've done here is inside of a loop, we're making a new function for each button where we're passing in the individual color that we set the background color of that button to be. Now this isn't ideal because, as we've already talked about, when we actually bind inside of render, it's going to make a new function every time any component is re-rendered. So for example, right there, the state changed. And remember, whenever the state changes with what we know so far, with the way our components are set up, the component is re-rendered. And so that means 4 buttons were re-rendered, 4 new functions were created with .bind. In the next video, we'll see a different way of structuring our applications where we can actually pass down methods from a parent to a child without having to bind in the loop. But for now, with what we know, this is one option, or we can use an arrow function. So the same idea, except it doesn't quite look like this. Instead, we have our arrow function, and we call this dot, change color, and we pass in C. And this is doing the exact same thing. In effect, it's just not using .bind explicitly here, but it achieves the same end result. We come over here, everything still works. So two choices, but either way, we are making new functions inside of render. So each time we render, we're making a bunch of new functions, regardless of whether we're using the arrow function to do it, or we're doing it using .bind. Okay, so next we're gonna see a different pattern where we can pass a function down from a parent to a child, and we won't have to bind in render.